Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 26th of December 2024. This has been a long time in coming because it is a 7-day Frontline update report. Wow, I know I used to do these daily, it's just time. So much more goes into all of my videos concerning everything going on around the world that I am just struggling for time to be able to put these together on a daily basis and also record the videos as well. Okay, but they are, I think, really important. It gives a sense of what is going on the micro levels, and that's it's really important to get both senses. Okay, if you don't know what the lines on my map mean in this map synthesis, please check out the screen at the moment. Let's go to the map and you will see that, well, you should see some pretty sizable changes because this is a 7-day update. This is the largest length of time I've had between updates since I've begun doing this. And as I say, we should expect some really large scale changes. Let's go to the Kursk region, where we can first of all see that the Russians are making these advances to the west of Malaya Lochnia. There's this kind of pocket of control, or at least grey zone up here, but the Russians are closing it in, moving towards Malaya Lochnia from the west eastwards, and trying to come down from the north as well. They've been doing this for an awful long time now, and they are losing huge numbers of people in these activities, but they are taking that land. They're closing that Kursk area down bit by bit. It comes at tremendous cost, of course it does, but it is something that will eventually happen unless something changes. I mean, by that I mean they're likely to culminate, but then not to culminate, because I presume they'll just continue taking North Koreans from North Korea, so that they just have this not necessarily inexhaustible supply, but this fairly long-term supply that allows them to generate territorial gains, even though they are incurring huge personnel costs. The Ukrainians, according to Surat maps, have taken the town of Cherkaskoye Porochnaya back from the Russians, or at least pushed them out, so that's now in the grey zone. So that's good news. That's in the northern part of the sector. And then to the bottom east, the Russians are, well, actually not bottom east, but because this is north of that, slightly north of Plukovo, the Russians having some success in taking. So these pink pins are where Andrew Perpetua had the Russian defensive line, and you can see pushed it right back to this area. So the Russians now in control, according to Perpetua, of Cherkaskaya Konopelka. Seen quite a bit of fighting around there, and Surat maps saying that the Russians have taken control over a triangle of land over there. Andrew Perpetua somewhat agreeing with that too. So it's fairly challenging for the Ukrainians in the Kursk sector because of the sheer volume of people that the Russians can throw at the problem there. Then we come down to, well, we're going to bypass actually the Kharkiv sectors, where there seems to be a bit of a stasis at the moment, and come to area to the along the Oskil River. I was going to say to the west of it. Some is to the west, some of it is to the east. Russians taking control right up to the river, and then some over the river and into this area of Dvorichna, which is a real challenge for the Ukrainians. They have got across the river there, and they're extending their control, according to Surat maps, or west of the river as well, further towards towards Kalinove and Holubivka, before we get down to Kupiansk. So this is really challenging. I'm worried about the Russians being the other side of the river here. I think that's a real challenge for the Ukrainians. Further to the south, I'm less worried about this, even though it's larger amounts of territory that the Russians have supposedly taken. Andrew Perpetua showing that the Russians have made some fairly significant gains, sort of equalizing the very in and out front lines around here, around the Pischani, or south of Pischani now, as they move towards the Oskil River, further to the south of the Oskil River. Lots of fighting around Krylyakivka recently. The Russians making some gains, according to Surat maps, further to the south, although Andrew Perpetua has the lines somewhat different just in that area. much more agreement further along that sector. But yeah, certainly a worry there. And then we come down to a long way down past the Tulska, Terny, Serebryansky Forest and Kremina, past the Seversk front line. No change there. That's good news. And then we come down to the Bakhmut areas to Chaziv Yar, where actually it's a little bit of a mixed bag. The Russians taking some land to the north of Chaziv Yar, north of the town, as according to Syrian maps, but the Ukrainians pushing them back in the center, which we had seen previously around this rather large building there. That the I forget what kind of factory that is, but anyway, the Russians being pushed back there. But I did report that in the last mapping update, I think. So not too much of a change there. That's good news for the Ukrainians. Then we come down to Toretsk and New York. Syrian maps having the Russians advance up that railway line north of New York, just moving up towards through Leonidivka and up to Sherbinivka there. Actually, Andrew Perpetua now agreeing that the Russians do have control over quite a large bridgehead there, it's salient going northwards. So that's worrying for the Ukrainians, and some small gains inside Toretsk as well. Toretsk is a bit of a hellhole. In fact, the Russians gaining more and more territory there, so they have the majority of Toretsk under their control. It is looking challenging for the Ukrainians, isn't it? All over the front line, that desperation for needing boots on the ground. Now, it's been pretty challenging news for Pokrovsk, as people are saying that it's going to be attacked from two flanks, as they are really extending their control. This is 7 days worth of changes, but you can see what has happened. This is where Surat Maps had the Russian defensive line previously, the darker pins there, and Andrew Perpetua had, ignore those ones, that's some kind of glitch going on there, but had a front line that looked a bit like this, and now they're fairly similar. So both mappers broadly agreeing south of Pokrovsk as to what's happened there, and it is challenging. Ukrainians are being pushed back around Pokrovsk to the south. Not too much of a change over here to the east towards Myrnahrad, and this is because that's where the Ukrainian fortifications are along here, the trench lines. But it seems like I don't know what the trench line situation is directly to the south, and this seems to be where the Russians have had much more joy in coming through and approaching Pokrovsk to the south. Really very close to Pokrovsk, really, just mere kilometers away. Fairly substantial gains, as you can see, all the way down this front line. And then going into Karakova, the Russians inching through Karakova. Actually, for that being a week, they haven't actually advanced hugely in Karakova, which is good news for the Ukrainians along this front line here, but they have been filling in the gaps further to the south. This was the river that comes up here. This is low ground, which has a number of towns: Ilinivka, Romanivka, Hanivka. So Hanivka was where the Russians had supposedly surrounded the Ukrainians. There are some claims that quite a few prisoners were taken there, but I've not seen any visual evidence of that. But those rumors are kicking about. And then Uspanivka as well. Russians pushed the Ukrainians out of there, and it is looking challenging here too, as the Russians taking more and more land. Although I was expecting for a 7-day update there to be a little more Russian control in this area, so perhaps, I don't know if they're slowing down at all, but maybe meeting a bit more resistance. And then the other worrying area is Velika Novosilka, where they're having a little bit of success to the north at Novy Kumar, where they had been pushed back out there. Now they push back in, and that would allow them to surround Velika Novosilka basically on 3 sides if they continue coming up through Neskuchna and up the Mokry Yali River here towards Velika Novosilka from the south, taking it from the east and then from the north as well. This is looking a challenging environment and taking some more land further to the east as well. So I think, we are seeing, what we've seen for the last few weeks. But, it is really worrying. The Ukrainians really struggling for boots on the ground. They need reinforcements. They need Russia to really be suffering outside of these frontline areas in terms of the economy, in terms of materiel, in terms of recruitment. The Russians still seem to be holding on. There are ideas that maybe they're just throwing absolutely everything they can, which is what I've been saying, at the Ukrainians before January the 20th, the inauguration of Trump, because that's what they're hoping. They're hoping to have as much as they possibly can, so that if and when they are forced into negotiations, they are in the commanding position, in having the momentum behind them, and they can say to the Americans or whatever, the international community, look, hey, we are the powerful force here. Look, if you want us to stop this war, we will just stop where we are and have all of the land that we have under our control at the moment, and that has increased of late. So I think they're possibly just trying to get absolutely everything they can. In the Robotyne area, the Russians have made some small gains there, Nesteryanka as well, further to the west of Robotyne, and actually some gains for the Ukrainians in pushing. This is a bit kind of random, but I have shown this previously. We had Kamyanska reports that the Ukrainians around this Zaporizhzhia town had forced the Russians back from several positions there and occupied it themselves. So really taking the initiative in that neck of the woods. He says, Grayscale here says, other channels reporting even larger gains in the area for the Ukrainians. It is a bit of a weird one, that, as they're suffering most other places on the front line. Russian drones attack Ukrainian positions in Kamyanska, proving Ukrainian advances, says Andrew Perpetua, with some geolocations of activity that is taking place there, showing that is indeed what is happening, that the Ukrainians are making some gains in Kamyanska, geolocating evidence there and showing Russian munitions hitting at certain places. So if we go and do a bit of a geolocation, this is where the Russians are dropping some munitions, which would, one would assume, therefore, that's where the Ukrainians are in order for the Russians to hit them there. Let's put that in. There we go. So that is right where we just seen there. That's that geolocation. Russians ceding some of this territory to the Ukrainians pushing forward and then being hit by Russian artillery or drones and whatnot. So good news for the Ukrainians there, but there's very little good news, all things considered. But that is one area. And then we also have news of lots of activity in Kherson. The Russians really possibly trying to do exactly what I was just talking about, making sure that they have as much territory as possible, trying to attack everywhere, including in places that, oh my goodness, I just don't think this is worth their while. Sending people across a river is much more consuming, much more attritional than sending those same people, across, put all the people they're trying to throw across the river in boats up to certain areas on the front line here. You're going to have more success over there. So I'm not quite sure what the Russians are trying to do here. But anyway, Russian forces, says no reports, have intensified shelling in the Kherson region and are trying to gain a foothold with deep reconnaissance groups. All attempts to capture parts of the right bank, it is a higher bank as well, the right bank of the Kherson, the Dnipro River region, have so far been unsuccessful, according to Alexander Prokudin, the head of the Kherson Oblast Military Administration. So just, as someone says here, it's hard to supply troops on the right bank. Why would they want to take it again? I don't quite know what's going on there, but they are losing troops in so doing, but they are trying to get a foothold across that river. So I think it's looking pretty challenging on a micro level for Ukraine. I think generally, geopolitically, I think Russia are seriously on the back foot. I think economically they're on the back foot. There are more and more things that are happening that are not going Russia's way. One of them is the loss of the Azeri airplane to over the last couple of days. It seems like the Azerbaijanis have now announced officially that the Russians have shot that plane down, and they refused to let it land, and it had to go across the Caspian Sea and then crash. This is arguably, embarrassing for the Russians, but problematic politically speaking. I think there's not a lot of appetite for support of Russia concerning the Christmas bombings that they've just partaken in. But then I keep hearing other outbursts and claims and statements from certain politicians in the US, and you're thinking, what? So some politicians in the US are starting with, Ukraine should give up Crimea and X, Y, and Z in order to just start the negotiations. You're like, really? And it's this idea that they're demanding that all the leverage is out of Ukraine's hands even before you start negotiations. It's just insanity in negotiating insanity. But it's going to be interesting to see how this next year plays out, because I'm not really sure that Ukraine are going to want to do what particularly the Republicans in America are suggesting. But do they have enough in the tank, in terms of personnel, reserves, to be able to hold on to continue prosecuting this defensive war? There are obviously lots of unknowns, but it's really difficult for the Ukrainians. But at the same time, they're just having a lot of weapons coming online, distance drones, distance missiles of their own production, and they're going to be, as you've seen the last couple of weeks, and there were some people saying that January could be a month where they just start hammering the crap out of the Russians for the same kind of reason. Like leading up to January the 20th, they might have some kind of momentum, but not momentum on the battlefield, momentum in the air with these missiles and drones to hammer the crap out of Russia, so that Russia are economically on their knees, leading up to forced negotiations. So all sorts could be happening. We'll have to see how it all plays out. So many variables to contend with. But I do think both sides are weak. I think Russia is much more, long-term weak than Ukraine. Ukraine's weakness is merely in human beings. And this is what we've been saying for 1.5 years plus. If only Western countries have really backed Ukraine to the hilt previously, then they'll be in a much better position now. Other things to add to the woes of Russia is that Finland is being pretty hardcore on what's gone on with these undersea cables linking Finland to Estonia. And you've had press conferences today, Christmas Day and Boxing Day and whatnot, where they are talking about, the threat of what Russia is doing. So Russia are kind of... They're not doing things to make it easy for themselves. I think Russia are making some serious blunders, personally. If I was Russia, I wouldn't be doing things to really annoy third-party countries. Like, I wouldn't be cutting undersea cables, because you're giving the excuse for other countries to say, no, we don't want Ukraine to give up X, Y, and Z, because Russia really are the bad guys. If you weren't doing all of this, you might have much more support from other countries to force Ukraine into a negotiated settlement that has them giving up their territories just to make this thing stop, type thing. But Russia are not making it easy for other countries to do that by having these hybrid warfare attacks on these other countries. I just think it's the whole war was stupid from Russia's point of view, but the insanity of what they're doing now, I just can't make sense of it. Anyway, let me know what you think. Take care, and I will be doing a geopolitical news update in a short period of time. Speak soon.